Resuming our discussion of Zionism, last segment we talked about three distinct movements: the religious, the assimilationist, and the socialist. I want to take a moment now and say a few words about Zionism itself. And that is, the first point is we need to remember that Zionism is not just a religious movement. A good part of it had to do with the Jews' encounter with modernity, because this is a period that it's a period of upheaval, major upheaval in Europe, not just political but also economic, industrial age in Europe. And for many assimilationists that we talked about, for many of them, the concern or the question that haunted them was whether or not nationalism will lead to anti-Semitism. This is a very important question, because if this emergence of nationalism would produce anti-Semitism rather than embrace the Jews, it would isolate them, then this would be a major cause for concern. So we're going to return to that issue shortly when we discuss the assimilationist setbacks. But also important was another strain of Zionism that also emerged sometimes in late 19th century and early 20th century, had to do with the encounter of Judaism itself, qua religion, as a religion, with modernity. So the issue here was, can Judaism modernize? Or, in other words, can Judaism survive, in fact, in a modern age? So, in short, Zionism had emerged as a solution to two distinct problems. One was finding a solution to the problem that confronted all Jews, whether religious or irreligious, and that was the problem of anti-Semitism. But also, the other aspect of it was finding a solution to the problem confronting Judaism, that is, Judaism as a religion. The challenge, or more accurately, the threat that was being posed by modernity. Now, those who were concerned with this latter challenge facing Judaism, were led by a great Jewish thinker by the name of Asher Ginsburg. And Asher Ginsburg had a pen name of Ahad Ha'am, meaning one of the people, and he wrote under that name. What really concerned Ginsburg was that Europe was fast modernizing, and the Jews were becoming increasingly caught in this modernization and were becoming increasingly irreligious. So he was particularly alarmed by the Jewish intelligentsia, who were becoming increasingly secular in their outlook. To Ginsburg, therefore, this whole notion of assimilation into European life by Jews, into a secularized Europe or European society, posed a grave threat to Judaism. So now remember the era and the time. The assimilationist Jew were encouraging the younger Jews and the intellectuals to try to assimilate into this rapidly evolving European polity. And for Ginsburg, therefore, fighting the tide of modernity on its own turf was simply a losing battle. According to Ginsburg, the Jews needed to recoup their energies in their own homeland, away from Europe. Only in their own homeland could they then encounter effectively the question of modernity on their own terms. So, to sum up, Zionism, as it emerged more than 100 years ago or so, was a movement designed to solve two problems. The first being, again, the problem of the Jews, the anti-Semitism, and then the other problem, the problem of Judaism and its survival in a modern era, or more accurately, I should put it, the Judaism's response to the challenge of modernity. All right, with that summary, let us now go back and see how each of the three main movements that we discussed earlier fared with the changing world. There were some disappointments and setbacks with each of these three Jewish responses to the rise of nationalism in Europe. And the first one was the Orthodox Jews, an Orthodox response, if you remember. And in the case of Orthodox, you will see that it morphs into religious Zionism or religion Zionism. The event that really led to this was the pogrom that occurred in 1881 in the city of Kiev in Ukraine. There was an ugly anti-Semitic incident in that city, and out of that incident emerges a movement that really splits with the Orthodox initial prescription of doing nothing. And so out of this movement emerges the people, Orthodox, that are rejecting the do nothing prescription. They say that we can't wait for Messiah. We have to do something ourselves and do it now. And for them, or for most, this means getting out of Europe and going to the Promised Land. Therefore, what's happening there is that you're having polarization developing within the Orthodox rank, those who still persist on doing nothing, God will protect us, and those who say that we got to do something ourselves and get out of there. So that was the first group. What about the assimilationists? Well, in the case of the assimilationists, you will see that they end up advocating what we call political Zionism. And the event that really was a major setback to the cause of assimilationists was the so-called Dreyfus Affair in France. And what it did was to really deliver a terrible shock to the Jews in Europe. Theodor Herzl was a journalist, and he was almost fully assimilated Jew. He went to church, and the only thing he had not done was to formally convert to Christianity. Herzl covered the Dreyfus Affair or Dreyfus trial in France, and it was during the course of that trial that he ended up reversing himself, deciding that assimilation will not work. The case of Dreyfus was important because Dreyfus, like Herzl, was also an assimilated Jew. He was an army officer in the French army, but now he was being accused, falsely as it turned out, of having passed on state information and secrets to the Germans. So after watching that trial and how unfairly this assimilated Jew, Captain Dreyfus, was being treated, Herzl concluded that the Europeans will always treat you as a Jew, even if you don't consider yourself a Jew, and try to assimilate completely by giving up your Jewish identity. So the young Herzl was convinced that assimilation will not work, and therefore he started political Zionism. In 1895, Herzl actually wrote a book called The Jewish State. His idea was that the Jews need a home, they need a land to go to, and the idea was pretty simple: just a piece of land where there are no people, and match the land with the Jews. So the Zionist motto after that publication became a land without a people for a people without a land. Notice that at this point there is absolutely no mention of Palestine. Initially, the idea was to go around the world and try to find a piece of land, and then ship the Jews there to start a new modern society. The idea of promised land at first did not play a significant part or role for Herzl. Herzl had pragmatic concern, not religious one. And the place he had originally in mind was Uganda. He did not think of Palestine. He just wanted a political solution to the Jewish problem, and that solution meant territory. Moreover, he believed that other states will be more than happy to get rid of their Jewish minorities and have them shipped away to this new land. However, it soon became very clear to Herzl that the only land where he can get sufficient Jewish support and mobilization and migration would be the promised land in Palestine. So that was the situation with the assimilationists. Once Herzl had decided that they need to get the Jews out of Europe and create their own society, then among the accomplishments that they were able to achieve was the following. One was the creation of the World Zionist Organization in Basel, Switzerland. So now you have an actual organization, an institution that would be following up on this idea. And in 1897, we have the first major Zionist Congress held there. And then the second thing was for Herzl and his political Zionist ally try to get recognition for a Jewish state. In their early attempts, their initial target was the Ottoman Sultan. His treasury was depleted because of the corruption in his government, and he definitely was in dire need of financial assistance. And also remember now, this is prior to World War I. The Ottoman Empire is, at least nominally, rules Palestine. So the Zionists used one very prominent and wealthy Jew by the name of Baron Rothschild, and he is sent as emissary to meet with the Sultan to see if he can get the Sultan agreeing to a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Their meeting doesn't amount to much, so with the failure from that meeting, they really redoubled their effort realizing that the British are truly in charge of that area. So they start lobbying the British to see if they could get them the homeland they want. Their effort finally pays off with the Balfour Declaration of 1917, which essentially designate a national Jewish home in Palestine. And then finally, what happened to the socialists? Well, the socialists evolved into socialist Zionism, and they too were also disappointed in socialism, because very soon they realized that even hardcore communists and socialists can still be anti-Semitic. So they concluded that although the idea of socialism is a good one, it must be implemented in the land of Israel. There was some tension between political Zionism and social Zionism. The political Zionists really wanted recognition from the West, that is the capitalist world as far as the socialists were concerned. And the socialists simply said, forget about the capitalist world, and we don't need their recognition. So they end up basically going their own way, the socialists ignoring the rest of the world. Their aim is to create sort of a grassroots socialism in the new land of Israel. 1892, the first group of Jews begin to move into Palestine. This group really was traditionalists. They were neither communist nor highly religious. But socialists begin to move or migrate into Palestine at the beginning of the 20th century. They moved to Palestine and they started to buy land, and therefore they become the first pioneer to come to Israel or to Palestine at that point and build what they called kibbutz. Kibbutz are these communes, and the best example of what we will call grassroots socialism. And the socialists also develop a blueprint for a new society, which they formulate in great detail for the rest of the society.